The rain hadn't stopped for 3 days. It drummed against the funeral home windows like 1,000 tiny fists, matching the hollow rhythm of my breaking heart. My parents lay side by side in matching mahogany caskets, their faces peaceful in a way I hadn't seen in years. Mom's cancer had taken her slowly. Dad's heart attack came 3 days later. The doctor said it was medical, but I knew better. He couldn't live without her. I stood there in my black dress. My 3 children pressed close to me. Kimberly, my 16-year-old, trying to be strong but her mascara streaking down her cheeks. Eric, my 14-year-old son, his jaw clenched tight like his grandfather's used to get. And little Sharon, only 8, clutching her stuffed rabbit and whispering questions I couldn't answer. The funeral parlor was filled with family and friends, their voices a low murmur of condolences and shared memories. But all I could hear was the silence where my parents' laughter used to be. That's when Martin leaned close to me. My husband of 18 years. The man who had promised to love me through sickness and health, through joy and sorrow. His breath was warm against my ear as he whispered 6 words that would haunt me forever. I want a divorce, Geraldine. It's over. The world stopped. The rain stopped. My heart stopped. I turned to look at him, certain I'd misheard. But his cold gray eyes held no warmth, no regret, no love. Just impatience, as if my parents' funeral was an inconvenience keeping him from more important things. What did you say? My voice was barely a whisper. You heard me. He straightened his tie, that expensive silk one I'd bought him for our anniversary. We'll discuss the details when we get home. Try to keep it together for the kids. Then he walked away. Just like that. As if he'd commented on the weather instead of destroying my world at the moment I needed him most. I stood there, surrounded by mourners paying their respects to my parents, feeling more alone than I'd ever felt in my life. Kimberly's hand slipped into mine, her fingers trembling. Mom? What's wrong? You look like you've seen a ghost. Maybe I had. The ghost of the man I thought I married. The ghost of the life I thought we'd built together. As I watched Martin shake hands with my uncle, his smile perfectly practiced, I realized something dark and cold settling into my chest where love used to live. He had chosen the worst day of my life to betray me. He had calculated this moment, knowing I'd be too devastated to fight back. But Martin had made one crucial mistake. He had forgotten who I was beneath: the grieving daughter, the devoted wife, the gentle mother. He had forgotten that I was my father's daughter. And my father had taught me that sometimes, the only way to survive a predator is to become one yourself. Before we continue, please write in the comment which country you are watching this video. We love knowing where our global family is tuning in from. And if this is your first time on this channel, please subscribe. Your support helps us bring even more epic revenge tales of life. Enjoy listening. My name is Geraldine Matthews, though it won't be for much longer. 6 months ago, I was the kind of woman who baked cookies for school fundraisers and never missed a parent-teacher conference. I organized birthday parties and kissed scraped knees and believed that love could conquer anything if you just tried hard enough. I met Martin when I was 25, fresh out of my master's program in psychology, working at a community center in downtown Chicago. He was 32 then, a rising star at Mitchell & Associates, one of the city's most prestigious law firms. He had this way of making you feel like you were the only person in the room when he looked at you, intense gray eyes that seemed to see right through to your soul. You're different, he told me on our 3rd date, taking my hand across the candlelit table at Romano's. Most women just want to talk about themselves. But you actually listen. You care about things that matter. I believed him. We married 2 years later. Mom cried through the entire ceremony. Dad walked me down the makeshift aisle with tears in his eyes, whispering, "He better take care of my little girl or he'll answer to me." For a while Martin did take care of me. We bought our first house, a modest 3-bedroom colonial in the suburbs. I gave up my job at the community center when Kimberly was born, because Martin said it would be better for the children if I stayed home. "A mother's love can't be replaced," he'd said, kissing my forehead as baby Kimberly slept in my arms. Eric came 2 years later, all elbows and energy from the moment he could crawl. Then Sharon, our surprise baby, born when I thought we were done having children. Each birth brought new joy, new purpose. Martin worked longer hours to support our growing family, and I threw myself into motherhood with the same intensity I'd once reserved for my career. But somewhere along the way something changed. It started small. Comments about dinner being too salty or the house being too messy. Sighs when the children were too loud during his important phone calls. He stopped asking about my day, stopped noticing when I changed my hair or wore something new. Geraldine, can you keep it down? Became his most common phrase. Geraldine, where did you put my? Geraldine, not now, I'm busy. I became invisible in my own home. The children felt it too, though they couldn't name it. Kimberly, my sensitive oldest, started closing her bedroom door more often. Eric threw himself into sports, anything to stay busy after school. Little Sharon began having nightmares, crawling into bed with me in the middle of the night, whispering, "Daddy seems mad all the time." I told myself it was stress. Martin's job was demanding. Partnership at the firm was competitive. He was providing for us, sacrificing for our family. The least I could do was be understanding. I made excuses when he missed Kimberly's school play because of a client dinner. When he forgot Eric's championship game because of a golf meeting. When he came home at midnight having a different smell of perfume. Marriage is work, I told myself, the same thing Mom used to say when I complained about Dad's long hours at the factory. You don't give up when things get hard. But this wasn't hard. This was dying slowly, one indifference at a time. The final months before my parents' deaths were the worst. Martin had become a stranger living in our house, someone who ate our food and slept in our bed but felt nothing for the people around him. He spoke to me like I was his employee, giving orders, expecting compliance, showing no warmth or affection. When Mom got sick, he barely acknowledged it. When she went into hospice, he couldn't be bothered to visit. I'm not good with that stuff, Geraldine. You handle it. So I handled it alone. I held Mom's hand through the chemo. I slept in hospital chairs and fed Dad when grief made him forget to eat. I planned the funeral arrangements while Martin complained about the cost. And through it all, I still believed we could fix this. I still believed that somewhere inside the cold stranger was the man who used to bring me coffee in bed on Sunday mornings, who used to dance with me in the kitchen while dinner cooked. I was such a fool. The night before the funeral, I found Martin on his laptop in our bedroom, typing emails instead of helping me prepare for the worst day of my life. Honey. I sat on the edge of the bed, my voice small and hopeful. Tomorrow is going to be really hard for me. Could you maybe put work aside and just be there? He didn't even look up from his screen. Geraldine, I have deadlines. The world doesn't stop because your parents died. Your parents. Not our loss or my in-laws. Your parents. Like they were strangers to him instead of people who had welcomed him into their family, who had babysat his children and invited him to every holiday dinner for 18 years. That's when I should have known. That's when I should have seen what was coming. But I was drowning in grief, gasping for air, and I still believed that the man I married was somewhere inside the shell sitting beside me. I still believed that love could survive anything. I was wrong about so many things, but I was right about one thing. Love does survive. It survives by transforming into something else entirely. Something much more dangerous. The morning of the funeral, I woke up before dawn to the sound of Martin in the shower. Through the bathroom door, I could hear him humming, actually humming, while his wife lay in bed dreading the day ahead. I dragged myself to the kitchen and made breakfast for the children. Kimberly sat at the table in her black dress, picking at her cereal while tears dripped into the bowl. Eric stood by the window in his only suit, the one that was already too short in the sleeves, his shoulders rigid with the effort of not crying. Sharon sat in her booster seat, asking over and over why Grandma and Grandpa couldn't just wake up. Sometimes people get so tired that they need to sleep forever, I told her, the same lie I'd been repeating for days. How do you explain death to an 8-year-old? How do you explain that the two people who loved her most in the world besides me were never coming back? Martin came downstairs in his charcoal suit, looking polished and professional. He grabbed a piece of toast and checked his phone. Martin. My voice cracked. Could you maybe help me with the kids this morning? This is really hard for them. He glanced up, irritated. What do you want me to do, Geraldine? They're upset. It's normal. They'll get over it. Kimberly's head snapped up, her eyes flashing with anger that looked so much like my father's. Get over it. They're our grandparents. Kimberly, don't raise your voice at me. Martin's tone was sharp, the same one he used when she left her backpack in the hallway or forgot to clean her room. Why not? You don't even care that they're dead. Her voice broke on the last word and she ran upstairs, her bedroom door slamming hard enough to shake the walls. Martin shook his head as if our daughter's grief was just another inconvenience. She's being dramatic. Something cold settled in my stomach. She's 16 years old and she just lost her grandparents. The only grandparents she really knew. Martin's parents lived across the country and visited maybe once a year, treating our children like polite strangers. Look, I get that you're all upset, but life goes on. They were old, Geraldine. This isn't exactly a surprise. My father was 68. My mother was 65. They should have had decades left together, should have watched Sharon graduate, should have been there for Kimberly's wedding someday. They weren't that old. My hands shook as I poured coffee I couldn't taste. And even if they were my parents, Martin. They were your children's grandparents. Could you maybe pretend to care? He sighed, the long-suffering sigh of a man dealing with an unreasonable woman. I care, Geraldine. But falling apart isn't going to bring them back. Someone has to keep it together. That's what he called his complete emotional absence. Keeping it together. The funeral service was everything my parents would have hated. Too formal, too impersonal, too full of people who barely knew them saying empty words about their legacy and peaceful rest. I sat in the front row with my children, Martin beside me but miles away, checking his phone whenever he thought no one was looking. Pastor Paul spoke about Mom's volunteer work at the food pantry, Dad's 40 years at the steel mill. He talked about their love story, high school sweethearts who never looked at anyone else, who built a life together based on kindness and hard work and devotion to family. Listening to those words, I realized how far I'd fallen from their example. They had shown me what real love looked like and I had settled for so much less. When it came time for the burial, the whole family gathered around the twin plots at Greenwood Cemetery. The rain had stopped but the sky stayed gray, heavy with the promise of more storms coming. I stood between Kimberly and Eric with Sharon in my arms because she was too scared to let go. My siblings flanked me. My older brother Lionel with his wife and kids, my younger sister Adriana holding her baby. The whole family was there except for the one person who should have been my anchor. Martin stood slightly apart, checking the time on his expensive watch. The same watch I'd saved for months to buy him for Christmas 3 years ago, working extra shifts at the part-time job I'd taken when Sharon started kindergarten. As they lowered my parents' caskets into the ground, I felt something inside me break. Not just my heart, that had been cracking for months. Something deeper. The part of me that believed in forever, that believed in the promises people make when they love you. The children were crying openly now. Kimberly's sobs were quiet but desperate. Eric's tears fell silently down his cheeks. Sharon buried her face against my shoulder and wailed for her grandma. I held them together while I fell apart inside. That's when Martin made his move. He stepped close enough that anyone watching would think he was comforting his grieving wife. His hand rested on my shoulder and to everyone else, it probably looked like support. But his grip was cold, mechanical. He leaned down, his lips nearly touching my ear, and spoke the words that would change everything. I want a divorce, Geraldine. It's over. The world tilted. The ground beneath my feet felt like it was crumbling away, just like the dirt being shoveled onto my parents' caskets. I turned to stare at him, certain I'd misheard. But his expression was calm, calculated. He'd planned this moment. He'd waited until I was at my most vulnerable, most broken, to deliver the killing blow. What? The word came out as barely a whisper. You heard me. His voice was flat, emotionless. We'll discuss the details at home. Try to keep it together for the kids. Then he stepped back, his hand falling away from my shoulder, leaving me cold and shaking. I looked around wildly, wondering if anyone else had heard. But the family was focused on the burial, on saying their final goodbyes. No one noticed that my husband had just destroyed what was left of my world. Kimberly's hand slipped into mine, her fingers ice cold. Mom? What's wrong? You look like you're going to faint. I forced myself to breathe. In and out. In and out. Like Mom had taught me during my childhood panic attacks. I'm okay, sweetheart. Just saying goodbye is hard. But I wasn't saying goodbye to my parents anymore. I was saying goodbye to the woman I used to be. The woman who believed in love and forgiveness and second chances. That woman died at Greenwood Cemetery, buried alongside my parents in the cold, dark ground. What rose in her place was something else entirely. The ride home from the cemetery was silent except for Sharon's occasional sniffles. She had cried herself to sleep in her car seat, her small hand still clutching the white rose she'd wanted to put on Grandma's casket. Martin drove with his usual precision, hands at 10 and 2, eyes on the road. The same way he approached everything in his life. Controlled, efficient, emotionally detached. I sat in the passenger seat staring out the window at the familiar streets of our neighborhood, seeing them as if for the first time. Kimberly and Eric sat in the back seat, whispering to each other in the way they did when they sensed adult tension but didn't understand it. They'd been doing that more often lately, I realized. Creating their own little alliance against the growing coldness in our house. When we pulled into our driveway, the sight of our home hit me hard. The white colonial with blue shutters that we'd painted together our second summer here. The garden where I'd taught the children to plant tomatoes. The front porch where Martin and I used to sit in the evenings talking about our dreams. Now it just looked like a house. 4 walls and a roof sheltering people who barely knew each other anymore. "Kids, go change out of your good clothes," I said as we walked through the front door. "There's leftover casserole from yesterday if you're hungry." They disappeared upstairs, and suddenly I was alone with my husband for the first time since his devastating whisper at the cemetery. Martin loosened his tie and headed straight for his home office. Of course. Even today work would come first. "Martin." My voice stopped him at the bottom of the stairs. "We need to talk." He turned, and for just a moment I saw something flicker across his face. Guilt? Regret? But it was gone so quickly. "Not now, Geraldine. I have briefs to review." Briefs. The word came out sharp and bitter. "I just buried my parents and you want a divorce, but you have briefs to review?" He glanced toward the stairs, checking to make sure the children weren't listening. "Always worried about appearances, our Martin. Keep your voice down." He walked back to me, his expression hardening. "Yes, we need to talk. But not when you're emotional and the kids are around." Emotional. As if grief was some character flaw I needed to overcome. "When then? Tomorrow? Next week? When exactly would be convenient for you to destroy our family?" Something ugly flashed in his eyes. "Don't be dramatic, Geraldine. This isn't working anymore. You know it, I know it. We're just going through the motions." Going through the motions? I stared at him, seeing a stranger. "Martin, I'm your wife. The mother of your children. We've been together for 20 years. 18 years of marriage," he corrected as if the distinction mattered. "And yes, you're the mother of my children. That won't change. We'll work out custody, child support, all of that. Be civilized about it." Civilized. The word tasted like poison in my mouth. "You asked me for a divorce at my parents' funeral." My voice was getting louder despite his warnings. "At their graveside while I was watching them being buried. How exactly is that civilized?" I chose that moment because I knew you'd be too upset to make a scene. The honesty of it hit me like a slap. "I thought it would be easier." Easier for who? He shrugged, and that small gesture broke something else inside me. 20 years together, and my pain was just an inconvenience to be managed. "Look, Geraldine, we both know this marriage has been over for a long time. We're like roommates at this point. When's the last time we actually talked about anything that mattered? When's the last time we made love?" The words came out bitter. "About 6 months ago, when you rolled over afterward and immediately checked your phone." His jaw tightened. "Don't make this about sex." "Then what is it about?" "Because I'm trying to understand how you can throw away 18 years of marriage, 3 children, everything we've built together, and act like it's no more significant than canceling a dinner reservation. You want to know what it's about?" His composure finally cracked, and I saw the anger he'd been keeping buried. "It's about coming home to a house that feels like a morgue. It's about having a wife who's given up on everything except being a victim. It's about pretending to be happy in a life that stopped working years ago." A victim? "Martin, I've spent the last 18 years raising your children, managing your household, supporting your career, and resenting every minute of it." He stepped closer, his voice dropping to that cold, controlled tone that made my skin crawl. "Don't act like you've been some kind of martyred saint, Geraldine. You chose to give up your career. You chose to stay home. Nobody forced you. You asked me to. You said the children needed their mother. The children needed a mother. They needed stability and care and attention. What they got was someone going through the motions, making everyone miserable with her quiet suffering." I felt like he'd reached into my chest and squeezed my heart until it stopped beating. Quiet suffering? Come on, Geraldine. The sighs, the martyred looks, the way you've been sleepwalking through life for the past 5 years. You think I don't notice? You think the kids don't notice? Above us, I heard a door creak. One of the children listening from the top of the stairs. How much had they heard? How much of this poison had already seeped into their young hearts? We'll talk about this later, I whispered. No, we won't. There's nothing left to talk about. Martin straightened his tie, his mask sliding back into place. I'll sleep in the guest room tonight. Tomorrow I'll call my lawyer. You should do the same. He turned to go, then paused. And Geraldine? For the children's sake, try not to make this any harder than it has to be. They don't need to see their mother fall apart. Then he walked away, leaving me standing in the hallway of the house we'd bought together, the house where we'd raised our children, the house that now felt like a mausoleum for everything I'd thought was real. I stood there for a long moment, listening to the sounds of my family. Martin's office door closing with a decisive click. Kimberly's music playing softly from her room. Eric bouncing a basketball against his bedroom wall. Sharon talking to her stuffed animals in the sweet, innocent voice that still believed in happy endings. They didn't know yet. They didn't know that their father had just blown up their world. They didn't know that everything they'd counted on, their home, their family, their security, was about to disappear. But they would know soon enough. I walked to the kitchen window and looked out at the backyard where they'd played as toddlers, where we'd had birthday parties and barbecues and lazy Sunday afternoons that felt like they would last forever. Martin was right about one thing. I had been sleepwalking through life. For years I'd been so focused on keeping everyone else happy, on holding our family together through sheer force of will, that I'd forgotten who I was underneath it all. But I was awake now. Wide awake and seeing clearly for the first time in years. That night I lay in our king-sized bed. My bed now, I supposed, staring at the ceiling and listening to Martin's presence in the guest room down the hall. The house felt different already, charged with secrets and broken promises. I must have dozed off some time before dawn because I woke to the sound of Sharon crying. Mommy. Her voice was thick with tears and terror. Mommy, I had a bad dream. I stumbled out of bed and down the hall to her room, my heart racing. Sharon was sitting up in her bed, surrounded by her army of stuffed animals, tears streaming down her face. Oh, sweetheart. I gathered her into my arms, feeling how small and fragile she was. At 8 years old, she still believed the world was safe, that mommies and daddies stayed together forever. What happened? What did you dream about? You and Daddy were fighting, she sobbed against my shoulder. And then Daddy went away like Grandma and Grandpa, but he didn't get sick first. He just disappeared. My blood went cold. How much had she heard yesterday? How much of our argument had filtered through the old walls of our house? Baby, Daddy's not going anywhere, I lied, hating myself for it. He's right down the hall in the guest room. Why isn't he in your room? Her question was so innocent, so trusting. Did you have a fight? I closed my eyes, trying to find words that wouldn't shatter her world. Not yet. She'd just lost her grandparents. She couldn't lose her sense of security too, not all at once. Sometimes grown-ups need space to think about things, I said carefully. It doesn't mean we don't love you. But you still love each other, right? She pulled back to look at me with those big brown eyes that were so much like my mother's. Like Grandma and Grandpa loved each other? The lie stuck in my throat like a stone. We both love you very much, Sharon. That will never change. It wasn't an answer, and she was smart enough to know it. Her lower lip trembled and fresh tears spilled down her cheeks. I want Grandma, she whispered. I know, baby. I want her too. I held Sharon until she fell back asleep, then crept back to my room as the sun was coming up. But before I could close my door, I heard another sound. Kimberly talking quietly on her phone. No, I don't know what's happening, she was saying. But something's really wrong. Dad slept in the guest room, and Mom looks like she's going to throw up every time she looks at him. I paused outside her door, hating myself for eavesdropping but needing to know how much damage had already been done. I think they're getting divorced, Kimberly continued, her voice breaking. God, Adriana, what if they get divorced? What happens to us? What happens to Sharon? My hand flew to my mouth to muffle the sob that wanted to escape. Kimberly, my responsible, sensitive oldest child, was already carrying the weight of adult fears on her 16-year-old shoulders. I can't leave Sharon alone with this, she was saying. She's already so messed up about Grandma and Grandpa. Mom and Dad split up now. I don't think she'll survive it. The pain in her voice was unbearable. This was supposed to be the year Kimberly started thinking about college, about her future, about all the possibilities ahead of her. Instead, she was lying in bed at dawn, trying to figure out how to protect her little sister from their parents' failures. I wanted to burst into her room and hold her, to promise her that everything would be okay. But I couldn't make that promise anymore. I didn't even know what okay looked like. Downstairs, I found Eric in the kitchen mechanically eating cereal while staring at nothing. At 14, he was all arms and legs, caught between childhood and becoming a man. Lately, he'd been the strong one, the peacekeeper, trying to smooth over the tension that had been building in our house. "Morning, honey." I tried to keep my voice normal as I started the coffee. "You're up early." He shrugged, not looking at me. "Couldn't sleep." "Bad dreams too." "Something like that." He pushed his cereal around the bowl, then finally looked up at me. "Mom, are you and Dad okay?" The direct question hit me like a punch to the gut. Eric had always been the most perceptive of my children, the one who saw through adult pretenses and polite lies. "Why do you ask?" "Because he slept in the guest room. Because you both look miserable. Because Kimberly's been crying all night and Sharon's having nightmares." His voice was steady, but I could see the fear in his eyes. "Are you getting divorced?" The word hung between us like a bomb waiting to explode. I sat down across from him, my hands shaking as I reached for his. "Eric. Just tell me the truth, Mom. Please. I'm not a little kid." Looking at his face, so much like Martin's but with my father's stubborn honesty, I realized he was right. He wasn't a little kid anymore. None of them were, really. They'd been living in this house, feeling the coldness between their parents, absorbing the tension like poison. "We're having some problems," I said carefully. "Your father and I, we need to figure some things out." "Problems like you don't love each other anymore?" His bluntness caught me off guard. "It's complicated, honey." "No, it's not." Eric pushed his bowl away and stood up. "Either you love each other or you don't. Either you want to stay married or you don't. It's not complicated, it's just hard." Out of the mouths of babes. My 14-year-old son had just summed up what I'd been trying to avoid facing for months. "What do you want me to say, Eric?" "I want you to say you're going to fight for us." His voice cracked on the last word. "I want you to say our family is worth saving." Before I could answer, Martin walked into the kitchen, already dressed for work in one of his expensive suits. He looked polished and professional, as if he hadn't just dropped a nuclear bomb on his family less than 24 hours ago. "Morning," he said curtly, pouring himself coffee and checking his phone. Eric stared at his father with something close to disgust. "Really, Dad? You're just going to work like everything's normal?" "Everything is normal." Martin's tone was cold. "I have meetings. Mom just buried her parents yesterday and you told her you want a divorce at the funeral. Nothing about this is normal." My heart stopped. Eric had heard. Somehow he'd heard Martin's whispered words at the cemetery. Martin's jaw tightened. "That's between your mother and me." "No, it's not." Eric stood up straighter and I saw a flash of the man he would become. Strong, principled, unwilling to back down from what was right. "It's between all of us. We're your family too, remember? Don't take that tone with me." "What tone should I take, Dad? Should I be grateful that you waited until Grandma and Grandpa were in the ground before you decided to destroy our family?" "Eric, that's enough." But even as I said it, I was proud of him. Proud that he had the courage to stand up to his father when I had spent years making excuses. Martin set down his coffee cup with controlled force. "Your mother and I will discuss this situation with you children when the time is appropriate. Until then, this conversation is over." "When will that be? After you've already moved out? After you've divided up our stuff like we're some kind of business deal?" The kitchen fell silent except for the ticking of the clock on the wall. The clock Martin and I had bought at an antique shop during our second anniversary weekend. Everything in this house held memories, held pieces of the life we'd built together. Martin straightened his tie, his mask firmly back in place. "I'll be late tonight. Don't wait up." Then he walked out, leaving his son standing there with tears of rage and disappointment streaming down his face. I went to Eric and pulled him into my arms, feeling how tall he'd gotten, how solid. When had my little boy become this young man who was braver than his mother? "I hate him," Eric whispered against my shoulder. "I hate him for doing this to you. For doing this to us." "Don't say that, honey. He's still your father." "No." Eric pulled back, his eyes blazing. "A father protects his family. A father doesn't abandon them when things get hard. From upstairs I heard Sharon's voice calling for me and Kimberly's door opening. Soon they would all be down here looking to me for answers I didn't have, for reassurance I couldn't give. But as I looked at Eric's face, hurt and angry and determined, I realized something. My children weren't just victims in this situation. They were witnesses. They had seen their father's cruelty, his cold calculation, his complete disregard for their pain. And they would remember. When Martin tried to rewrite history later, when he painted himself as the reasonable one who'd simply grown apart from his wife, my children would remember the truth. They would remember that he'd chosen the day of their grandparents' funeral to deliver his ultimatum. They would remember how he'd walked away from their tears, how he'd prioritized his work over their broken hearts. That knowledge wouldn't heal their wounds, but it would armor them against his lies. And maybe, just maybe, it would armor me too. 3 days after the funeral, I was sorting through my parents' personal effects when I found it. A manila envelope tucked inside my mother's recipe box, addressed to me in her careful handwriting. For Geraldine, when you need to remember who you are. Inside was a letter, dated just 2 weeks before she died, and a small key I didn't recognize. My dearest daughter. If you're reading this, I'm gone, and I pray that I was wrong about what I suspected. But knowing your stubborn heart, you're probably still making excuses for him, still believing that love can fix what was never really whole. Geraldine, there are things you need to know. Things I should have told you years ago, but I kept hoping I was mistaken. The key opens a safety deposit box at First National Bank, box 847. Martin doesn't know about it. I opened it in my name only, using money your father and I had been saving for your children's college funds. Inside you'll find evidence of things that will hurt you. But they'll also free you to see clearly. Your husband is not the man you think he is. He never was. You are stronger than you know, my darling girl. You are your father's daughter and mine. Don't let him convince you that you're nothing without him. You were everything before you met him, and you'll be everything long after he's just a bad memory. I love you. Fight for yourself. Fight for your children. But most of all, fight because you deserve better than the scraps he's been throwing you. All my love, Mom. My hands shook as I read the letter a second time, then a third. What evidence? What had my mother discovered that she'd felt compelled to hide away like this? I looked around the empty house where I'd grown up, where my parents had loved each other for 47 years, where they'd shown me what real partnership looked like. The silence felt heavy with secrets. The bank was a 15-minute drive from my parents' house. I sat in the parking lot for 10 minutes, the key burning in my palm, terrified of what I might find inside that box. Part of me wanted to throw the key away, to go home and pretend I'd never found my mother's letter. But I could hear her voice in my head, the way she'd sounded during our last real conversation when the morphine hadn't yet stolen her clarity. Geraldine, honey, you're worth more than settling for someone who doesn't see your value. I'd thought she was talking about life in general, about not accepting less than I deserved in friendships or work. I'd had no idea she was talking about my marriage. Inside the bank, the safety deposit box was larger than I'd expected. When the clerk left me alone with it, I lifted the lid with trembling hands. The first thing I saw was a manila folder thick with photographs. My stomach lurched as I opened it. Martin and a woman I didn't recognize, kissing passionately outside Romano's. The same restaurant where he'd told me I was different, where he'd made me believe I was special. The timestamp showed the photos were taken 18 months ago. More photos. Martin and the same woman, blonde, probably in her 30s, beautiful in a sharp professional way, entering a hotel together. Leaving the hotel together. Her hand on his chest as he laughed at something she'd said. My hands shook as I flipped through image after image. Martin had been having an affair for at least a year and a half. While I'd been caring for my dying mother. While I'd been managing our household and raising our children. While I'd been making excuses for his coldness and distance. But there was more. Bank statements showing a secret account in Martin's name only, with regular deposits that didn't match his salary. Money being moved from our joint savings. Money that was supposed to be for the children's college funds, into this private account. Credit card statements for cards I'd never seen, showing charges at expensive restaurants, jewelry stores, weekend trips to places we'd never been together. The jewelry store receipts were itemized. A diamond tennis bracelet, $3,200. Pearl earrings, $850. A gold necklace with sapphire pendant, $1,875. I'd never seen any of these pieces. He'd never given me jewelry like this, Not even for our anniversary. There were hotel receipts too. Weekend getaways to romantic bed and breakfasts. Ski trips to Aspen. A week-long vacation in Napa Valley. All with her. All while he told me we couldn't afford a family vacation this year. At the bottom of the folder was a business card. Dakota Jensen, private investigator. A note was paperclipped to it in my mother's handwriting. Hired him 8 months ago when I noticed Martin's car at the Marriott while passing. Dakota is discreet and thorough. He has more evidence if you need it. I sat in that small, sterile room, surrounded by proof of my husband's betrayal, and felt something inside me shift and harden. The woman who had made excuses for 18 years, who had blamed herself for her marriage's failure, who had accepted crumbs and called them love, that woman was disappearing. In her place was someone colder, someone calculating. Someone who had just discovered that her entire adult life had been built on lies. I pulled out my phone and called Dakota Jensen. Mrs. Matthews. His voice was kind but professional. I'm sorry about your mother's passing. She was a remarkable woman. She hired you to investigate my husband. Yes. She was concerned about some irregularities she'd noticed. I have additional documentation if you'd like to meet. How long has he been cheating? Pause. The current affair has been ongoing for approximately 2 years. But Mrs. Matthews, there were others before this one. Your husband has been unfaithful for most of your marriage. The words hit me like a physical blow. Most of our marriage. Not just recently, not just since things got bad between us. From the beginning or close to it. How many others? At least 4 that I could document with certainty. Possibly more. I closed my eyes trying to process this information. While I was pregnant with Eric, Martin was cheating. While I was up nights with baby Sharon, he was cheating. While I was planning Kimberly's birthday parties and Eric's baseball games and family Christmas mornings, he was living an entire secret life. Mrs. Matthews? Are you still there? Yes. My voice sounded strange, hollow. The woman in the current photos. Who is she? Her name is Melissa Kane. She's an associate at Hartwell and Associates, a competing law firm. They met at a legal conference 2 years ago. Melissa Kane. Even her name sounded sophisticated, successful. Everything I wasn't anymore. Dakota, I need to know everything. Every detail, every receipt. Can you help me with that? Of course. But Mrs. Matthews, I have to ask, what are you planning to do with this information? I looked down at the photos scattered across the small table. Martin's face in every one of them, animated and happy in a way I hadn't seen in years. He looked like a man in love. Just not with his wife. I'm planning to stop being a victim, I said quietly. I'm planning to fight back. After hanging up with Dakota, I sat alone with the evidence of my destroyed marriage. Every photo, every receipt, every bank statement was a knife in my heart. But they were also something else. They were ammunition. For 18 years I'd played by Martin's rules. I'd been the dutiful wife, the perfect mother, the woman who never made waves. I'd absorbed his coldness, his criticism, his indifference, and convinced myself it was normal. That it was my fault somehow. But this wasn't normal. This was systematic deception. This was a man who had taken my love, my trust, my best years, and thrown them away for momentary pleasures with women who didn't know his children's names. I carefully packed everything back into the safety deposit box, except for one photo. The one where Martin was laughing with Melissa outside Romano's, where he looked happier than he'd ever looked with me. I slipped that photo into my purse. Not as a reminder of his betrayal, but as a reminder of who he really was beneath the mask of the devoted family man. That evening, I sat at the kitchen table with Dakota Jensen's complete file spread before me like a roadmap to hell. The children were upstairs doing homework and Martin was working late again, though I now knew exactly what that meant. The depth of his deception was staggering. Credit cards I'd never known about. Business trips that weren't business trips. Weekend conferences that didn't exist. For years he'd been living a double life so elaborate it must have taken tremendous energy to maintain all the lies. But it was the financial information that truly shocked me. Martin had been systematically draining our accounts for years. The college funds we'd been building for the children, gone, transferred to his private accounts. The emergency fund my father had insisted we maintain, emptied. Even the life insurance money from my parents' policies, which had been deposited just days ago, he'd already moved half of it. He'd been planning this divorce for a long time, positioning himself financially while keeping me in the dark about our true financial situation. When he told me we couldn't afford family vacations or Kimberly's summer art camp, he'd been spending twice that amount on weekend getaways with his mistresses. The phone rang, startling me out of my dark thoughts. Martin's name appeared on the screen. "Hi," I answered, my voice carefully neutral. "Geraldine, I'm going to be very late tonight. The Russell case is heating up and we need to prepare for depositions tomorrow." Another lie, delivered with practiced ease. According to Dakota's surveillance notes, the Russell case had been settled 3 weeks ago. Tonight, Martin was having dinner with Melissa Kane at an expensive steakhouse downtown. "Of course," I said. "Will you be home at all?" "Probably not until after midnight." "Don't wait up." "I won't." After he hung up, I stared at the phone for a long moment. How many times had he called with similar excuses over the years? How many times had I accepted his lies without question even when something felt wrong? I'd been the perfect mark. Trusting, loyal, too focused on keeping peace to ask uncomfortable questions. But I was done being perfect. Done being convenient. I picked up my phone again and called Dakota Jensen. "I need you to follow them tonight," I said without preamble. "Martin and Melissa Kane. I want photos, receipts, everything." "Mrs. Matthews, you already have extensive evidence of the affair. For divorce proceedings. This isn't just about divorce anymore." I looked down at the bank statements showing how he'd stolen from our children's futures. "I want him to pay for what he's done. Not just to me but to Kimberly and Eric and Sharon. I want him to face consequences for every lie, every betrayal, every dollar he stole from his own children." "What exactly are you thinking?" "I'm thinking that a man who's been living a double life for years must have made some mistakes. Left some trails. Made some enemies." I paused, an idea forming. "Dakota, in all your investigation, did you find anything else? Anything beyond the affairs and financial deception?" A long pause. "There may be some irregularities in how he's been handling client accounts at his firm. Nothing I could prove definitively, but your husband has been taking credit for work done by junior associates. Billing clients for hours he didn't work while he was with his mistresses. There are also some questionable expense reports, travel claims that don't match his actual whereabouts." My heart began to race. "That's fraud, isn't it?" "If it could be proven, yes. But Mrs. Matthews, you need to be very careful here. If you're thinking about exposing this." "I'm not thinking about it," I interrupted. "I'm planning it." After I hung up with Dakota, I sat in the quiet kitchen and thought about the man I'd married. The man I'd believed was honest, ethical, a good father despite his coldness. That man had never existed. He'd been a fiction, a role Martin played when it suited him. The real Martin was a thief and a liar. He'd stolen from his clients, from his employer, from his own family. He'd betrayed everyone who trusted him, and he'd done it all with such careful calculation that it had taken a private investigator 8 months to uncover it all. But now I knew the truth. And knowledge, I was beginning to understand, was power. I heard footsteps on the stairs and quickly closed the files. Kimberly appeared in the kitchen doorway, her face puffy from crying. "Mom, can we talk?" I opened my arms and she collapsed into them like she used to when she was small and the world seemed too big and scary. "What's wrong, sweetheart?" "Everything." Her voice was muffled against my shoulder. "Adriana's parents got divorced last year, and she says it ruins everything. She says kids always have to choose sides and holidays get weird, and you never feel safe anywhere because everything can change without warning." My heart broke for her. At 16, she should have been worried about boys and college applications and whether her dress for junior prom would be perfect. Instead, she was lying awake at night terrified that her world was about to explode. "Kimberly, listen to me." I pulled back to look at her face, so young and scared. "No matter what happens between your father and me, you will always be safe. You will always have a home with me. That will never change. But what if Dad wants custody? What if he tries to take us away from you?" The question hit me like ice water. In all my shock and pain, I hadn't fully considered that possibility. Martin might try to take my children from me. He might paint me as an unfit mother, unstable. He had money for good lawyers. He had connections in the legal community. He could try to take away the only things in my life that truly mattered. "He won't," I said, but even as the words left my mouth, I wasn't sure. The Martin I'd thought I knew would never hurt his children that way. But that Martin was a lie. The real Martin was capable of anything. Promise me, Mom. Kimberly's eyes were desperate. Promise me we'll stay together no matter what. I held her face in my hands, looking into eyes that were so much like mine at that age. Trusting, hoping for promises that adults couldn't always keep. I promise you that I will fight for you with everything I have. I promise that I will never stop being your mother, no matter what your father does or says or tries. It wasn't the absolute guarantee she wanted, but it was the truth. And maybe it was enough because she nodded and hugged me tight. I love you, Mom. I love you too, baby. More than you'll ever know. After Kimberly went back upstairs, I returned to the files scattered across the kitchen table. But now I wasn't just looking at evidence of Martin's betrayal. I was looking at a battle plan. The next morning, Martin left for work with his usual efficiency, briefcase in hand, acting for all the world like a devoted family man heading off to provide for his wife and children. I should be home by 7, he said, straightening his tie. We can talk then about our situation. Our situation. As if 18 years of marriage and 3 children could be reduced to a situation to be managed. Of course, I replied, my voice carefully neutral. The children and I will be here. After his car pulled out of the driveway, I waited exactly 15 minutes, long enough for him to be truly gone, then called in sick to the part-time job I'd taken when Sharon started kindergarten. I had more important work to do today. My first stop was Martin's home office. For years this room had been off-limits. Martin's sanctuary, where he worked on important cases and confidential client matters. I'd respected that boundary, bringing him coffee when he worked late, quietly closing the door when the children got too loud. Now I realized it wasn't respect. It was trained obedience. Another way he'd controlled the narrative of our marriage. I sat down at his desk, the same mahogany monster he'd insisted on buying when he made junior partner 8 years ago. For appearances, he'd said. Clients need to see success. The computer was password protected, but I knew Martin well enough to guess. He was methodical, practical. His passwords would be something he'd never forget. I tried Kimberly's birthday. Nothing. Eric's birthday. Sharon's birthday. Our anniversary. Nothing, nothing, nothing. Then I had a thought that made my stomach turn. I typed in Melissa's name followed by the year they'd met. The screen unlocked. His email was a treasure trove of evidence. Deleted messages from Melissa that he'd thought were gone forever, discussing their weekend plans while I was at my mother's bedside. Business emails showing the questionable billing practices Dakota had mentioned. Communications with his lawyer, not about our divorce, but about a client complaint that had been filed against him 6 months ago. A client who'd discovered Martin had been billing for work his junior associate had actually done. A client who was threatening to report him to the State Bar Association unless Martin made financial amends. Martin had been stealing from his clients and taking credit for other people's work. And he'd been clever about it, targeting clients who were unlikely to scrutinize their bills closely, spreading the fraudulent charges across multiple accounts so the pattern wouldn't be immediately obvious. But patterns could be found if you knew where to look. I spent the next hour downloading and printing everything, organizing it into folders the way I'd learned in my business administration classes 20 years ago. Before I became just someone's wife and someone's mother, I'd been good at this. Analysis, organization, problem solving. It felt good to use those skills again even for something so painful. My phone buzzed with a text from Dakota Jensen. Following DC today. Interesting developments. Can you meet this afternoon? As I texted back. What kind of developments? The kind that change everything. 2 p.m. at the Starbucks on 5th Street. After I finished with Martin's computer, I went through his filing cabinets. More evidence of financial impropriety, but also something more personal. A letter from Melissa, handwritten on expensive stationery. My darling Martin. I can't wait much longer for you to leave her. I know you said you need to wait until the children are older, but I'm 34 years old. I want children of my own, a real marriage, not stolen hours in hotel rooms. You promised me that this year would be different. You promised me that by Christmas we'd be together openly. If that's not true, if you're just stringing me along like Jennifer suspects you did with her, then I need to know now. I love you, but I won't be your secret forever. Forever yours, Melissa. Melissa was getting impatient. She was pressuring Martin to leave his family, threatening to end their relationship if he didn't follow through. Is that why he'd chosen the funeral to ask for the divorce? Not some sudden realization that our marriage was over, but pressure from his mistress who was tired of waiting? The thought made me physically ill. My parents' death hadn't just been an opportunity for Martin to deliver devastating news while I was too grief-stricken to fight back. It had been convenient timing for his romance with another woman. I was still processing this when I heard a car door slam outside. My heart jumped. Was Martin coming home early? Had he somehow realized I was going through his things? But it was just the mailman. Still, the scare reminded me that I needed to be more careful. Martin was a lawyer. He understood evidence and documentation better than most people. If I was going to build a case against him, I had to be smarter than he was. I spent the rest of the morning photographing documents with my phone before putting everything back exactly as I'd found it. By noon, I had enough evidence to bury Martin professionally and personally. But I wasn't done yet. At Starbucks, Dakota Jensen looked troubled. He slid a manila envelope across the table to me, then sat back with his coffee. "Mrs. Matthews, I need to ask you something before you open that. Are you sure you want to go down this road? Once you see what's in there, you can't unsee it." "I've already seen my husband kissing another woman, Dakota. I've already discovered he's been stealing from our children's college funds and defrauding his clients. What could be worse than that?" He sighed. "Your husband isn't just having an affair with Melissa Kane. He's been planning to leave his law firm and start a new practice with her. They've been systematically stealing clients and case files for months, preparing to take them when they leave." I opened the envelope. Inside were photographs of Martin and Melissa in what looked like a law office, but not his current firm. They were reviewing files, making copies, clearly working together on something secretive. "They've rented office space," Dakota continued. "Filed incorporation papers for a new firm. They plan to announce their departure right after your divorce is finalized, taking about 30% of Mitchell and Associates' client base with them." The pieces clicked into place. That's why he wants the divorce now. Not because Melissa is pressuring him, but because they're launching their business together. He needs to be free to be her partner publicly. "I believe so, yes. But Mrs. Matthews, there's more." Dakota pulled out another set of documents. "Your husband has been embezzling money from the firm's client trust account to fund their new venture. We're talking about serious financial crimes here. If this came to light, he wouldn't just lose his law license. He'd go to prison." I stared at the evidence in front of me. Martin wasn't just a cheating husband who'd fallen out of love with his wife. He was a criminal who'd been systematically stealing from everyone around him. His clients, his employers, his own family, to finance his new life with his mistress. How much money are we talking about? Close to $2 million over the past 3 years. $2 million. While I'd been clipping coupons and worrying about Kimberly's college tuition, Martin had been stealing millions to fund his fantasy life. "Mrs. Matthews, I have to ask again. What are you planning to do with this information?" "I'm planning to make sure he faces consequences for what he's done," I said quietly. "Not just to me, but to everyone he's stolen from. The authorities should handle this, not you." "The authorities will handle it. But first, Martin is going to understand exactly what it feels like to lose everything you thought was secure." I met Dakota's eyes. "He destroyed my life at my parents' funeral when I was at my most vulnerable. He calculated that moment for maximum impact, minimum resistance." I gathered up the photographs and documents, my hands steady now despite the magnitude of what I'd learned. Now it's my turn to calculate. That evening, Martin came home exactly at 7 o'clock, just as he'd promised. He found me in the kitchen, making dinner as if nothing had changed, as if I hadn't spent the day uncovering the full scope of his betrayal. "Smells good," he said, loosening his tie. "What are we having?" "Lasagna." I kept my voice light, domestic. "The children are upstairs finishing homework." He nodded, already reaching for his phone to check emails. The same routine we'd followed for years, except now I knew he was checking messages from his mistress and co-conspirator. "Martin, before we talk to the kids about our situation, there's something I need to discuss with you." He looked up, wariness flickering across his features. "What about?" I pulled out the photograph I'd kept from the safety deposit box, the one of him and Melissa laughing outside Romano's. I placed it on the kitchen counter between us, face up. Martin went completely still. For a moment the mask slipped and I saw genuine shock on his face. He recovered quickly but not quickly enough. Where did you get this? Does it matter? I kept my voice conversational as if we were discussing weekend plans. The question is, how long did you think you could keep lying to me? His jaw tightened. Geraldine. 2 years, Martin. You've been having an affair with Melissa Kane for 2 years. While my mother was dying, while I was caring for her and managing our household and raising our children, you were playing house with another woman. He straightened his tie, falling back on his lawyer training. This is exactly why I want the divorce. You've been having me followed, violating my privacy. Your privacy? The word came out sharp and bitter. You're married to me, Martin. You have 3 children. You don't get to have privacy about whether you're sleeping with other women. The profanity hung in the air between us. In 18 years of marriage I'd never spoken to him like this. The shock on his face was almost worth the pain of discovering his betrayal. Keep your voice down, he hissed, glancing toward the stairs. The children don't need to hear this. You're right. They don't need to hear about their father's affairs. They also don't need to know about the money you've been stealing from their college funds, or the credit cards you've been hiding, or the client trust account funds you've been embezzling. All the color drained from his face. What are you talking about? I pulled out my phone and showed him one of the bank statements I'd photographed. I'm talking about the $2 million you've stolen over the past 3 years to fund your new law firm with your mistress. Martin's hand shot out to grab my phone, but I pulled it back. I'm talking about the fact that you've been systematically defrauding your clients and your law firm while planning to take their business with you when you leave. My voice was getting colder with each word. I'm talking about the fact that my husband isn't just a cheating piece of garbage, he's a criminal. Geraldine, you don't understand the complexities of law firm finances. Don't. I held up a hand to stop him. Don't you dare try to gaslight me about this. I may have been naive about your affairs, but I'm not stupid. Embezzlement is embezzlement, Martin. Theft is theft. He stared at me for a long moment, his face cycling through emotions. Shock, fear, calculation. I could almost see his lawyer brain spinning, looking for angles, for ways to minimize the damage. What do you want? He finally asked. The question hung between us like a challenge. What did I want? Revenge? Justice? My old life back? An apology that could never undo the years of betrayal? I want you to understand that you made a mistake, I said quietly. You thought you could destroy my life without consequences. You thought I'd crumble when you asked for the divorce, that I'd be too devastated and dependent to fight back. I stepped closer, and for the first time in years, Martin actually looked uncertain. But you forgot something important. You forgot that I'm not just the woman you've been taking for granted. I'm a mother who would do anything to protect her children. And you've been stealing from them, Martin. You've been taking money that was supposed to secure their futures and using it to build a new life without them. I would never hurt the children. You already have. My voice broke slightly, but I pushed through it. You've been planning to abandon them for years. You've been stealing their college money. You've been so focused on your affair and your criminal enterprise that you've barely been a father to them at all. Martin's phone buzzed with a text message. Without thinking, he glanced at it, and I saw Melissa's name on the screen. Is she wondering why you're late for your dinner date? I asked. His face went ashen. How could you possibly? I know everything, Martin. Every hotel, every restaurant, every lie you've told for the past 2 years. I know about Jennifer, the woman before Melissa. I know about the weekend trips to Napa that you paid for with stolen money while telling me we couldn't afford a family vacation. I moved closer, close enough that I could see the fear in his eyes. I know that you're not just having an affair, you're planning to marry her. I know about the new law firm, about the clients you're planning to steal, about every single crime you've committed to finance your fantasy future. What are you going to do? His voice was barely a whisper. I smiled, and something in that expression must have chilled him because he actually took a step backward. I'm going to give you exactly what you gave me at my parents' funeral, I said softly. I'm going to wait for the perfect moment when you're at your most vulnerable. And then I'm going to destroy everything you think is secure. Before he could respond, I heard footsteps on the stairs. Sharon appeared in the kitchen doorway, rubbing her eyes. Mommy? Why are you and Daddy talking so loud? Instantly, I transformed back into the gentle mother she knew, pushing all the anger and pain down deep where she couldn't see it. We were just discussing some grown-up things, sweetheart. Are you hungry? Dinner's almost ready. Martin watched this transformation with something like awe. Maybe he'd forgotten that I was capable of controlling my emotions, of being strategic instead of reactive. He was about to be reminded of a lot of things he'd forgotten about me. Over dinner we played the perfect family one last time. Martin asked about homework and soccer practice. I served his favorite meal and smiled at the children's stories about their day. Sharon chatted about her art project. Kimberly complained about her English teacher. Eric described his basketball practice. Normal. Domestic. Peaceful. But underneath the surface, a war had begun. And Martin was about to learn that some battles are won not with loud explosions, but with quiet, patient, devastating precision. 2 weeks later Martin moved out. He did it on a Thursday morning while the children were at school, efficient and clinical as everything else he touched. Most of his clothes, his important papers, the expensive electronics he'd bought with stolen money, all packed into boxes and loaded into a moving truck as if our 18-year marriage was just another business transaction to complete. I watched from the kitchen window as he supervised the movers, directing them with the same calm authority he'd once used to plan our family vacations. The difference was that those vacations had been real, built from love and hope for our future together. This move was built on lies and theft and the systematic destruction of everything I'd believed in. Sharon had cried herself to sleep the night before, after we'd finally told the children that Daddy would be living somewhere else for a while. Kimberly had locked herself in her room and refused to speak to either of us. Eric had just nodded grimly as if he'd been expecting this moment for months. "Where is Daddy going to live?" Sharon had asked, her voice small and confused. "He's renting an apartment closer to his work," I'd answered, which was technically true. The luxury downtown loft he'd signed a lease for was indeed closer to his office. It was also closer to Melissa's apartment, but I didn't mention that part. Not yet. Martin finished loading his things and came inside one last time, ostensibly to say goodbye but really to remind me of my place in his carefully orchestrated plan. "The divorce papers will be filed next week," he said, his tone businesslike. "I've spoken with Tom Rylan about representing me. You should get your own lawyer." Tom Rylan. One of the most aggressive divorce attorneys in the city, known for leaving wives with as little as possible while protecting his clients' assets. Of course that's who Martin would choose. "I've already retained counsel," I lied smoothly. "Mrs. Walsh." Martin's eyebrows rose. Mrs. Walsh was Tom Rylan's main rival, equally ruthless but with a reputation for protecting women in high-stakes divorces. She was also expensive, more than we could afford or more than Martin thought we could afford. "Mrs. Walsh?" "Geraldine, her retainer alone." "Don't worry about the money, Martin. I have it covered." He stared at me for a moment, clearly wondering where I could have possibly gotten the funds for such an expensive attorney. Let him wonder. It was good practice for all the wondering he'd be doing soon. "Fine," he said finally. "Just remember, I want this to be civilized. For the children's sake." Civilized. His favorite word, the one he used to cloak his cruelty in reasonableness. "Of course," I agreed. "Everything will be very civilized." After he left, I sat alone in the house that felt both empty and somehow larger without his oppressive presence. For the first time in years I could breathe freely in my own home. But I wasn't celebrating. I was planning. That afternoon I had lunch with Mrs. Walsh. I'd actually retained her the week before, after Martin's confession about the divorce, but before he knew I'd discovered the extent of his crimes. Mrs. Walsh was a tall, silver-haired woman in her 50s who'd built her career destroying men who thought they could discard their wives without consequences. "Mrs. Walsh," she said, reviewing the files I'd compiled, "this is quite impressive work. You have enough evidence here to not only secure a favorable divorce settlement but to have your husband disbarred and criminally prosecuted." "That's the plan," I confirmed. "But I need the timing to be perfect. Martin thinks he's controlling this narrative, that he's going to walk away from this marriage with his reputation intact and his assets protected. I want him to feel completely secure right up until the moment his world collapses." Mrs. Walsh smiled, and it wasn't a pleasant expression. "What did you have in mind?" "I want to let him file for divorce first. Let him think he's getting ahead of any potential problems. Let him believe I'm just the devastated wife who's going to quietly accept whatever settlement he offers. That's risky, Mrs. Walsh. Once divorce proceedings begin, assets can be frozen, hidden, moved offshore. He's already moved most of our liquid assets," I interrupted, pulling out the bank statements Dakota had helped me compile. But he's been sloppy about it. Too confident. He's left a trail that will be easy for forensic accountants to follow. Mrs. Walsh reviewed the financial documents, her expression growing more impressed by the page. How did you obtain all this? I've been busy. I didn't elaborate. Some details were better kept private even from my own attorney. The point is, Martin has handed us everything we need to destroy him. He just doesn't know it yet. What's your timeline? I want to wait until he's fully committed to his new venture with Melissa Kane. Let them announce their new law firm, let them officially take clients from Mitchell & Associates. Let Martin feel like he's successfully transitioned to his new life. And then we drop every bomb at once. The affair, the embezzlement, the client theft, everything. I want his professional reputation destroyed at the same moment his personal life implodes. I want him to lose everything simultaneously so he can't use one area of his life to cushion the fall in another. Mrs. Walsh leaned back in her chair, studying me with new interest. Mrs. Matthews, I have to ask, are you sure you want to go this route? What you're describing isn't just divorce litigation. It's total war. Martin fired the first shot when he asked me for a divorce at my parents' funeral, I said quietly. He calculated that moment for maximum impact, knowing I'd be too devastated to fight back effectively. He's been stealing from his own children's futures to finance his affair. He's planning to abandon them entirely for a new life with his mistress. I met her eyes, letting her see the steel that had been forged in the fire of Martin's betrayal. So yes, I want total war. Because that's what he declared on me and my children the moment he decided we were disposable. 3 months passed. 3 months of Martin playing the role of the reasonable ex-husband, taking the children on awkward weekend visits to his downtown loft, sending child support payments that were deliberately lower than what he could afford, positioning himself as the responsible parent dealing with an emotionally unstable ex-wife. I played my part perfectly. I showed up to school events looking harried and overwhelmed. I made small talk with other parents about how hard it was being a single mother. I let Martin's friends see me struggling with basic tasks like getting the lawnmower to start or programming the new television remote. Everyone who knew us began to construct the narrative Martin wanted. Successful lawyer forced to divorce his mentally fragile wife, doing his best to maintain a relationship with his children despite her instability. Meanwhile, I was quietly building my case with the precision of a surgeon preparing for a complex operation. Dakota Jensen had continued his surveillance, documenting every meeting between Martin and Melissa, every client they'd poached from Mitchell & Associates, every step in their carefully planned business venture. Mrs. Walsh had assembled a team of forensic accountants who were tracing every dollar Martin had stolen over the past 3 years. And I had been patient, watching, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. That moment came on Monday morning when Martin and Melissa announced the grand opening of Kane & Matthews Law, a boutique firm specializing in corporate litigation, with offices in the most prestigious building downtown. The announcement appeared in the legal journal and the business section of the newspaper. Photos of Martin and Melissa cutting a ribbon, both of them radiant with success and love, surrounded by clients they'd stolen from Martin's previous firm and colleagues who had no idea they were celebrating with criminals. Martin looked happier in those photos than I'd seen him in years. He looked like a man who'd successfully reinvented himself, who'd left behind the burdens of his old life for something bright and new and full of possibility. He looked like a man who thought he'd won. I smiled as I read the article over my morning coffee. The children had already left for school and the house was quiet around me. It was time. My first call was to Walsh. It's time to file, I told her. Everything's ready. The criminal referrals, the bar association complaints, the civil suits, all prepared and ready to go. Good. I want everything filed simultaneously. Martin should receive service of papers for the criminal charges, the ethics investigation, and the divorce countersuit all on the same day. My second call was to Dakota Jensen. I need you to deliver copies of the complete surveillance file to 3 people today, I said, reading from a list I'd prepared months ago. First, to Robert Mitchell at Mitchell & Associates. Second, to the senior partner at Kane & Matthews' biggest new client, Hartwell Industries. Third, to the editor of the legal journal. My third call was to Kimberly's school. This is Geraldine Matthews, I said to the guidance counselor. I wanted to give you a heads up that there may be some media attention around our family in the next few days. If any reporters contact the school asking about my children, please don't provide any information. Is everything all right, Mrs. Matthews? Everything's going to be fine, I said, and for the first time in months I actually believed it. It's just going to be a difficult week. By noon the trap was in motion. Martin received service of papers at his new office, in front of Melissa and 2 potential clients they'd been courting. Criminal charges for embezzlement, fraud, and theft. Ethics violations that would result in disbarment proceedings. A divorce countersuit asking for full custody of the children and claiming spousal support based on Martin's proven pattern of financial deception. The expression on his face, according to Dakota, who was positioned across the street with a telephoto lens, was exactly what I'd hoped for. Complete shock followed by dawning horror as he realized the scope of what was happening. Robert Mitchell received the full surveillance file at 12:30 p.m. By 1 p.m., security guards were at Kane and Matthews, confiscating files and computers as part of Mitchell and Associates' emergency injunction to recover stolen client information. Hartwell Industries received their copies at 1:15 p.m. By 2 p.m., they had terminated their contract with Kane and Matthews and issued a public statement distancing themselves from any association with the firm. The Legal Journal received their package at 2:30 p.m. By 4 p.m., the editor had called 3 other attorneys to verify the documentation, then began preparing an emergency edition exposing the scandal. But the masterstroke came at 5 p.m., when every major news outlet in the city received anonymous packages containing highlights from the surveillance files, along with a simple note: local attorney abandons family for mistress, steals millions to fund new business. By 6 p.m., Martin's face was on every local news station. The story had everything producers dreamed of: sex, money, betrayal, stolen client funds, and a successful man's spectacular fall from grace. The reporters had gotten hold of our wedding photo somehow, probably from one of Martin's colleagues, and they kept showing it alongside current photos of him with Melissa. The contrast was devastating. Young, hopeful Martin promising to love and honor his bride, versus current Martin stealing from his own children to finance an affair. I was making dinner for the children when the first news van pulled up outside our house. Kimberly looked out the window and turned to me with wide eyes. "Mom, why are there reporters in our driveway?" I turned off the stove and gathered my 3 children around the kitchen table. It was time for them to hear the truth. Not all of it, but enough to understand why their world was about to change again. "Your father has been in some trouble at work," I began carefully. "He made some bad choices, took money that didn't belong to him. The police and the courts are going to have to sort it all out." "Is Dad going to jail?" Eric asked, his voice steady but his eyes worried. "I don't know, honey. Maybe. Probably." Sharon started to cry and I pulled her into my lap. "What did Daddy do wrong? How do you explain to an 8-year-old that her father is a criminal? How do you protect her innocence while preparing her for the storm that's coming?" "He took money from his job that he wasn't supposed to take," I said simply. "And he's been lying to us about a lot of things." Kimberly was old enough to understand more. "Mom, is this why you and Dad got divorced? Because of what he did?" I looked at my 16-year-old daughter, so beautiful and smart and deserving of a father who would be a hero in her eyes instead of a cautionary tale. "Partly," I admitted. "Your father made choices that hurt our family." The phone rang. I ignored it. It rang again. And again. "Should we answer it?" Kimberly asked. "No. Tonight we're going to eat dinner together, just the 4 of us. We're going to watch a movie and make popcorn, and we're going to remind ourselves that we have each other no matter what happens to anyone else." As if on cue, my phone buzzed with a text from Martin. "What have you done?" I smiled as I deleted the message without responding. What had I done? I had given him exactly what he'd given me at my parents' funeral. I had waited for the moment when he felt most secure, most confident in his new life, and then I had destroyed everything he thought was permanent. The only difference was that Martin had earned every bit of the destruction heading his way. And I was just getting started. The next morning I woke to the sound of helicopters. News helicopters, circling our house like mechanical vultures, trying to get aerial shots of the family home of disgraced attorney Martin Matthews. I made coffee and watched through the kitchen window as reporters set up camp on our front lawn, their cameras trained on every window, waiting for a glimpse of the betrayed wife or the abandoned children. It was surreal. For 18 years I'd lived in this house in quiet anonymity, raising my children and managing my household while Martin built his reputation in the legal community. Now suddenly we were the center of a media circus. But I'd been preparing for this too. Mrs. Walsh arrived at 8 a.m. through the back door, avoiding the reporters out front. She looked grim but satisfied as she spread newspapers across my kitchen table. "It's front-page news in 3 papers," she said. "The story has everything: corruption, betrayal, a sympathetic wife, children caught in the middle. Public opinion is going to be entirely on your side." I scanned the headlines. Respected attorney steals millions for mistress. Family man's double life exposed. Local lawyer abandons wife and children for stolen money. The articles were devastating. They had quotes from clients Martin had defrauded, from junior associates whose work he'd stolen credit for, from colleagues who expressed shock and betrayal at his deception. They had financial records showing exactly how much money he'd taken from our children's college funds. But most damaging of all, they had the human interest angle. The grieving wife who'd just lost her parents, blindsided by divorce papers at their funeral, now discovering that her husband had been systematically stealing from their children's futures to finance an affair. "How do you feel about this?" Margaret asked, studying my face. "Having your private life splashed across every newspaper in the city?" "I feel like justice," I said quietly. Martin thought he could control the narrative, paint me as the unstable wife who couldn't handle the end of our marriage. Instead, everyone now knows exactly who he really is. My phone had been ringing constantly since yesterday evening. Reporters, old friends, even some of Martin's former colleagues expressing their shock and offering support. I'd turned off the ringer, but I could see the messages accumulating. The children came downstairs for breakfast, looking tired and overwhelmed. They'd heard the helicopters too, seen the reporters camping outside. "Mom," Kimberly said, her voice small, "everyone at school is going to know about this." "Yes, they are." I pulled her into a hug. "And that's going to be hard for a while. People are going to stare, ask questions, maybe say things that hurt. But you need to remember something. You have nothing to be ashamed of. Your father's crimes are not a reflection on you. But what if people think?" "Let them think whatever they want," I said firmly. "You know who you are. You're Kimberly Matthews, honor student, talented artist, loyal friend. You're Eric Matthews, star athlete, natural leader, young man with integrity. You're Sharon Matthews, bright, creative, full of love and joy." I looked at each of my children, seeing Martin's features mixed with mine, seeing the good people they were despite their father's failures. Your father's choices don't define you. They don't limit you. They don't change the fact that you are smart, capable, wonderful human beings who deserve every good thing life has to offer. Sharon climbed into my lap, snuggling against me the way she had as a toddler. "Mommy, are we going to be okay?" "We're going to be better than okay, baby. We're going to be strong." And for the first time since Martin had whispered those devastating words at my parents' funeral, I truly believed it. My phone buzzed with a text from Dakota Jensen. "Martin and Melissa both arrested this morning. Perp walk photos attached." I opened the attachment and saw Martin in handcuffs, being led out of their luxury office building by federal agents. His expensive suit was rumpled, his hair disheveled, his face a mask of shock and disbelief. Melissa walked behind him, also handcuffed, crying as cameras flashed around them. They looked exactly like what they were: criminals who'd finally been caught. I deleted the photos. I didn't need to see Martin's humiliation to feel satisfied. I could hear it in the helicopter rotors overhead, see it in the newspaper headlines, feel it in the way my children were finally learning that their mother was strong enough to protect them. Martin had spent months positioning himself as the victim of an unfortunate marriage, the successful man forced to make difficult choices. Now everyone knew the truth. He was a thief who'd stolen from his own children, a liar who'd betrayed everyone who trusted him, a coward who'd asked for divorce at a funeral because he'd calculated it would cause maximum pain with minimum resistance. But he'd miscalculated something crucial. He'd forgotten that the woman he was betraying was the daughter of a man who'd worked double shifts for 30 years to provide for his family. The daughter of a woman who'd volunteered at soup kitchens and taught Sunday school and believed that standing up for what's right was worth any personal cost. He'd forgotten that love, real love, the kind my parents had shown me, doesn't make you weak. It makes you fierce. 6 months later, I sat in a federal courthouse watching Martin be sentenced to 8 years in prison. He stood before the judge in an orange jumpsuit, his hands shackled, looking nothing like the confident attorney who'd once commanded respect in these same halls. The man who'd always been impeccably dressed now had hollow cheeks and unkempt hair. Prison had not been kind to him. Melissa had already been sentenced, 3 years for her role in the embezzlement scheme, though her cooperation with prosecutors had earned her a reduced sentence. She'd thrown Martin under the bus completely, testifying that he'd been the mastermind while she was just a naive associate who'd fallen for his manipulations. Maybe that was true. Maybe Martin had manipulated her and probably others before her. Maybe she really believed she was in love with a man who was going to leave his wife for her, not a criminal who was using stolen money to finance their affair. Or maybe she was just smarter than Martin when it came to self-preservation. Either way, she was in minimum security prison upstate, while Martin was heading to a federal penitentiary where white-collar criminals learned hard lessons about the real cost of their choices. The judge, a stern woman in her 60s who'd clearly seen her share of entitled men who thought the rules didn't apply to them, was not in a lenient mood. "Mr. Matthews," she said, "you have systematically betrayed the trust placed in you by your clients, your law firm, and most tragically by your own family. You stole money that was meant to secure your children's futures. You used your position as an officer of the court to commit fraud and embezzlement on a massive scale." Martin stood perfectly still, but I could see his hands trembling. "What makes your crimes particularly egregious," the judge continued, "is the calculated nature of your deception. This was not a momentary lapse in judgment or a single bad decision. This was a pattern of criminal behavior spanning years, during which you maintained the facade of a respectable family man while systematically destroying the lives of everyone who trusted you." I sat in the gallery with my children, watching their father learn the consequences of his choices. Kimberly held my hand tightly. Eric sat rigid with anger and shame. Sharon leaned against me, too young to fully understand the legal proceedings but old enough to know that Daddy was in serious trouble. They had chosen to come today. Against my advice, against the recommendations of their therapists, they had insisted on being present for their father's sentencing. "We need to see it end," Kimberly had said. "We need to see that there are consequences." So here they were, watching the man who was supposed to protect them being led away in shackles, finally facing justice for his crimes. The financial recovery had been better than I'd hoped. The forensic accountants had traced most of the stolen money to accounts Martin thought were hidden, and civil suits against both Martin and Melissa had resulted in substantial judgments. The children's college funds had been restored, plus damages. Our house was safe. Our future was secure. But the real victory wasn't financial. The real victory was sitting beside me in the form of 3 children who had learned that actions have consequences, that lies always come to light, and that their mother would fight to protect them no matter the cost. After the sentencing, we walked out of the courthouse together into the bright spring sunshine. The media circus had died down months ago, moving on to other scandals and tragedies. We were just a family again, scarred but healing, broken but not defeated. "Mom," Eric said as we reached the car, "do you think he's sorry?" I looked back at the courthouse, thinking about the man I'd once loved, the father my children had once trusted. Was Martin sorry? For the pain he'd caused us, or just for getting caught? "I think he's sorry he has to face consequences," I said honestly. "Whether he's sorry for what he did to us, I don't know, honey. And it doesn't really matter anymore." Kimberly squeezed my hand. "You did the right thing, Mom. Making him pay for what he did to us. I'd worried about this, about my children thinking I was vindictive, about them blaming me for their father's downfall. But they were older now, wise beyond their years in the way children become when they're forced to confront adult realities too early. They understood that I hadn't destroyed their father. I had simply stopped enabling his destruction of everyone around him. "Are we going home now?" Sharon asked. Home. The word had new meaning now. Not just the house we lived in, but the safe space we'd created together after Martin's betrayal had shattered our old life. "Yes, baby. We're going home." 2 years after Martin's sentencing, I stood in the kitchen of our house. Truly our house now, since the divorce settlement had awarded it to me along with most of Martin's assets, making Sunday breakfast for my family. The morning light streamed through windows that no longer felt heavy with secrets and lies. Kimberly was home from her first year at Northwestern University, studying psychology with plans to become a counselor for children of divorce. Eric, now a senior in high school, was being recruited by several colleges for basketball. Sharon, 10 years old and resilient in the way children can be, was setting the table while chattering about her art class. We had survived. More than that, we had thrived. The insurance money from my parents' life insurance policies, which Martin had tried to steal, had allowed me to go back to school and finish my master's degree in counseling. I now worked part-time at the same community center where I'd met Martin 20 years ago, helping women who were escaping abusive relationships. It was ironic in a way. Martin's betrayal had destroyed the woman I used to be, the accommodating wife who made excuses and kept peace at any cost. But from those ashes had risen someone stronger, someone who understood that love without respect is just manipulation, that keeping a family together isn't worth anything if it's built on lies. My phone buzzed with a text from Mrs. Walsh. Martin's parole hearing denied. Will serve full sentence. I showed the message to Kimberly, who was home from college for spring break. She read it without emotion, then handed the phone back to me. Good, she said simply. He needs to finish paying for what he did. Kimberly had been the most affected by Martin's betrayal, old enough to understand the full scope of his deception but young enough to have her fundamental sense of security shattered. She'd spent months in therapy working through anger and abandonment issues, learning to trust again. But she was strong now, stronger than I'd been at her age. She knew her worth, knew that she deserved better than the scraps Martin had been willing to give his family. They all did. Eric bounded into the kitchen, sweaty from his morning run, and grabbed an apple from the bowl on the counter. At 17 he was taller than his father had been, with broader shoulders and kinder eyes. Coach wants to know if you can come to the game Tuesday, he said. Scouts from Duke are coming to watch. My son was being recruited by Duke University on full scholarship, because he was talented and hardworking and had never needed to steal from anyone to achieve his goals. I wouldn't miss it, I told him. Sharon ran into the kitchen holding a drawing she'd made. A picture of our family, just the four of us standing in front of our house with a rainbow overhead. Look what I made in art class, she announced proudly. I looked at the drawing, at the way she'd positioned us all so close together, at the smile she'd drawn on my face. In Sharon's picture we looked happy, safe, complete. And we were. That afternoon, as we sat on the front porch watching Sharon play with the neighbor's dog. That night, after the children were in bed, I sat in my home office, Martin's old sanctuary now converted into my study space, and opened the journal I'd been keeping since the divorce. On the first page, written in the shaky handwriting of a woman barely holding herself together, were the words, Martin asked for a divorce at my parents' funeral. I don't know how to survive this. On the most recent page, in steady, confident script, I'd written, Today Kimberly told me she's proud of me for fighting back. I think Mom and Dad would be proud too. I thought about my parents, about the love they'd shown each other for 47 years, about the example they'd set for what marriage should look like. They taught me to stand up for what was right, to fight for the people I loved, to never accept less than I deserved. Martin had counted on me forgetting those lessons. He'd counted on 18 years of conditioning to make me accept his betrayal quietly, to let him walk away from our marriage without consequences. He'd forgotten that beneath the accommodating wife was the daughter of people who taught me that sometimes, the most loving thing you can do is refuse to enable someone's destruction of themselves and everyone around them. I closed the journal and looked around the office, at Kimberly's college acceptance letters on the bulletin board, at Eric's basketball trophies on the bookshelf, at Sharon's artwork covering one entire wall. Evidence of the life we'd built from the wreckage of Martin's betrayal. Evidence that sometimes when someone tries to destroy you, the best revenge is simply refusing to stay destroyed. Martin was in prison, stripped of everything he'd thought made him powerful. His reputation, his money, his freedom. He'd lost his law license, his business, his relationship with his children. The woman he'd betrayed his family for had testified against him to save herself. He'd gotten exactly what he'd given me at my parents' funeral. The complete destruction of everything he thought was secure, delivered at the moment he felt most confident in his new life. The only difference was that he'd earned every bit of his suffering. I turned off the lights and headed upstairs to check on my children one last time before bed. Kimberly was reading in her room, preparing for her psychology exam. Eric was already asleep, exhausted from basketball practice and dreaming, I hoped, of the bright future ahead of him. Sharon was curled up with her stuffed rabbit, the same one she'd held at my parents' funeral 2 years ago. They were safe. They were loved. They were free from the toxic influence of a father who'd seen them as inconveniences to be managed rather than precious gifts to be treasured. And I was no longer the broken woman who'd stood at that graveside, shattered by betrayal and unsure how to survive. I was someone who'd learned that survival isn't enough, that sometimes you have to be willing to fight, to demand justice, to refuse to let someone else's cruelty define your story. Martin had thought he was discarding his old life for something better. Instead, he'd freed us to become something better without him. In the end, his greatest crime wasn't the money he stole or the trust he betrayed. It was underestimating the strength of the woman he'd chosen to destroy. And that mistake had cost him everything.